And if you have questions, reach out. Ha, sounds like we just turned the recording on. So hopefully you will be able to review this on your own and reach out to me if you have any questions. But right here we have the eligibility and standard compliance standard side by side. One, the eligibility, we're going to take care of that around April when we're working on our annual plans application. That's when we're going to talk about that. So we just talked about it. The compliance standards, what we're about to do. We're going to, when we go into our MOE application and we put in our expenditures and we're comparing them to the prior year, making sure that we did not spend less than we did the last time we met. That is the part that we will be working on and talking about today. There are 4 tests that must be completed when comparing if you pass or met MOE. Joanne, let's take a look at those. The first test is, of course, looking at the local funds to see how much you spent. The second test is looking at local plus state. And then the third test is looking at per capita. When we're talking about per capita, we're talking about per child, the amount per child. Per capita for state plus local. That is the 4th test. And the system calculates it for you. If you've done this before, or you know where to look in the application, you should be able to go in there and look and see how it was calculated the prior year. Any assistance needed, I can help you with that. Go ahead, Joanne, next slide. So I want to give you a couple reminders. 3, we've talked about COVID-19. It is, of course, the center thing in our life right now. So first question you may have, is there a waiver or any flexibility? No waivers, USED nor the SEA can authorize any waivers. So there are no waivers right now. Second question, may an LEA or use CARES Act funds? No, CARES Act funds do not increase your IDA allocation. We've talked about that before, but CARES Act came into play last July. So I understand why you might be asking about that, because it would happen during the time period that we're reviewing, which is 2020, 2021. Very good. Next slide. And the last question, will an LEA increase its MOE obligation for future years if it uses CARES Act? Again, no, CARES Act does not increase your IDEA allocation. So no, those are 3 reminders that might be on your mind that I wanted to address right at the front. So go ahead, Joanne, let me show you the resources. So if you have any questions, once you receive this presentation about COVID-19 waivers, you will have these resources to reference. Next slide. Now, we're going to pause again. When I prepared for this presentation, I did a little groundwork in the state of Virginia, just trying to poll a few divisions to find out what's on your mind, what are your concerns as far as why you may not meet MOE. On the screen, you will see transportation, expense decreasing, staffing, changes in staffing, a lot of departures, retirements, etc. And then I heard a decrease in enrollment. So today, right now, I want to hear from the 110 people who are here. Please let me know why you think you may not meet MOE, or what is your concern? You ready, Joanne? Let's launch the poll.
I'm ready. And so this is poll number 2. Again, it is 1 question. Just go on in and answer the questions as to why you think you will have a decrease, and you can have multiple choices in this. We couldn't put a blank for you to put other in there, but if you could be so kind to put other in the chat box that we didn't get on this selection, we would really appreciate it. It looks like at this point that departure of staff and transportation and changes in costly students providing services are running neck to neck. We're not surprised. These are some challenging times. Decreased in enrollment. Yep. Less contracted services. These are some of the things in the chat box I'm hearing. We have struggled to fill vacant SPED positions. Understand. Our other relates to reduction of spending at regional programs, which was replaced by CISNA. Okay. We have about 60% of our participants have answered. Give it just a few more minutes to get going to see if we can get up to 70.
Let us know.
Yes, please let us know. Put anything in the chat box that is of concern to you that might be unique or different and it's not up here. Okay, so in a few seconds, I'm going to just end the poll. We only got to 60% of our participants. We have some, they're saying all the above are affecting it. Boy, we can understand that too. Not able to staff positions. Goodness, what an issue. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll now and share with you the results. So as you can see, we have decline in transportation, staffing, and changes in service to costly students. Staff being the highest issue that we're dealing with. And then other, we have some that have all the above and decrease in state and local revenue. So thank you for sharing with us that information. We're hoping that some of the things that we have to share with you today will help you be able to manage some of this. So thank you for sharing. I'm turning it over. As soon as I do. Here we go.
I think we'll move forward, Joanne.
Yes, we are moving forward. We just did the poll. And here we go, allowable and non-allowable expenditures.
So we're gonna blow through this a little bit because this is the part that's taking place now or has already taken place. And it's gathering the information. And this work is probably being done by your finance department and of course, collaboration with the SPED department. We want to make sure you know what's allowable and what's non-allowable for expenditures. That's the first thing you need to do to figure out if you're going to meet MOE. Next slide, Joanne. So let's talk about how you're categorizing some of these expenses. Again, this is a review for some, first time hearing it for others. So remember, you need to make sure you separate everything by local and state dollars. Federal is not accounted for in this situation for MOE. Also, make sure that when you show it, it's reported separately, not just pulling it, but make sure it's reported separately to make it easier for you when you enter it into the system. Expenditures that are above and beyond the cost of regular education programs. So we should not be looking at the general education. We should be looking specifically at the things that are for SPED. Capital outlay, or regular education services. For example, we shouldn't see things that are referenced in American Disabilities Act. If you're putting up new ramps, that's not part of SPED. That's probably more general education expense or regular education expense. Remember, you're only addressing the students that you are legally responsible for. Only the legally responsible. Your ASR, that report is a good way of using it as a categorization of your MOE expenses. I understand that they're done differently. We're asking for two different things, and we will also compare the MOE against the ASR, but please know that it is a good reference tool for you for categorizing. Now, make sure as far as when you're grouping expenditures that they fall in line with what is federal and state definition as allowable. And then and when you're looking at expenditures, again, I have to repeat, make sure that's for the sole benefit of students with disabilities, such as those students that have IEPs as far as being eligible in the determination process, okay? So make sure that is also noted. Next slide, Joanne, yep. So here's an example. We want to provide you a few examples, of course, of things that are allowable at the local and state. Special education teacher salaries, aides. I'm gonna let you look at that for a second. Your normal service providers, social workers, medical services for diagnostics, different types of people there and roles that do fall in line with expenditures. Next slide. Those that this applies to, expenses related for the instruction and services in jails, special education transportation, tuition paid to another division. Those again, don't forget about the homebound, your homebound, home-based services as well. Those things are important to make sure you capture in your expenses and equipment, construction, specifically for students with disabilities as noted in the IEP, not the regular construction. Go ahead, Joanne. So for those of you that may be a little more visual, here's a simple screen or chart of how you can break this apart to kind of get a visual view of what's local, what's state, how partial, there's some positions that may be funded partially local with state funds as well, and how it needs to be separated for this exercise. And go ahead, you can go to the next slide. Now, what's not allowable? So tuition received from another division is not allowable. General education teachers, principals, administrators, et cetera, people that reference the bigger population, the regular education, general education, you can use it. I want to put it out there, but you would have to have extensive detail as far as documentation, as far as the time that was spent. And a lot of divisions do not have the ability to keep up with that type of data. So if you're able to track that down to meetings with whom, for how long, by position, then you can, but it's normally not allowable if you cannot track it. General capital outlay, of course, general transportation costs, CSA, Comprehensive Service Act, the local match is not allowable, and costs that apply, of course, to all students cannot be included. So you've categorized all your expenses. You know how much you've expended for the 2020-2021 school year. You go to the MOE application, you compare it to how you guys met MOE last year, and you determine, we're not going to meet MOE. What do you do next? Don't jump. We have something for you. We have allowable exceptions. And what I would like to say about this is and again, those who don't know, I've been here with you a little over a year now. I have noticed that most of the divisions do not use allowable exceptions. So this is some information that is very valuable, I think, to the entire state. And I think some of it has to do with maybe it's time consuming to use the exceptions. But let's look at them first. Let's go ahead and look at them because they are the meat and potatoes of today's presentation. So first of all, when we talk about exceptions, they're expenditures that are for the current year. And when we say the current year, we're talking about 2020, 2021 for this MOE cycle. So that's when I say current year, that's what we're talking about. If you have expenditure or exception that can be used, you can use multiple exceptions. So you can use, we have 5, so we're going to go over them, but you can use all 5 if you need to. You're not limited. These exceptions ultimately will reduce your required MOE level that you must meet. So the comparison year is going to be decreased by using these exceptions. Next. Very good. MOE compliance. No waiver, as we stated before, will be issued. So in order to meet using these exceptions will be necessary if you're close. So we have one, of course, the voluntary departures and retirements, which is dealing with the personnel. You have the decrease in enrollment, and then you have termination of what we like to call costly students, where, a termination of an obligation or for a special education program. And then a costly expenditure, it could be a retirement of maybe construction or equipment. So let's take a look at them a little bit deeper. First of all, personnel and contracted services. This is one of the things you just told me. You're struggling with hiring teachers. You had a lot of departures, retirements. Voluntary is the word here. Voluntary, unless it is something that was just cause, that would be the exception. But most of the time it's because people have retired or left. So let's take a look at that and how that works. So for example, I think most of you pretty much understand, but I want to make sure we're clear. So you have a veteran school teacher, special ed, and that teacher makes $150,000 a year. You hire a less experienced teacher, and that person makes $90,000 a year. The difference is $60,000. That $60,000 can help you by reducing the level of effort which is the comparison year, by that amount. So that is how it works, is you're taking the current salary, comparing it to if you hire. So I want to make sure, if you hired, in this example, you did, someone else who makes less, that it is the difference that you can take. But there are other examples where you may not have hired anyone, then it would be the entire salary that would be able to be used to reduce the level of effort. If you have any questions as I go, you can put them in the chat. We'll catch them as we go, or we'll get them at the end. I do want to hear from you, so I want to make sure we keep moving. Decrease in enrollment, another exception you all have at your fingertips. So what we're doing is we're comparing year over year enrollment numbers. So this year we'll be referencing December 1, 2020 and comparing it to December 1, 2019. Excuse me, 2019. So if you decrease from one year to the next, the system will automatically calculate that for you, and you don't have to put in any information as you would for, of course, the people that have left or departed, the personnel. So this is an easier one for you to do because it's just automatic calculation. And if you need help on figuring out how to do it, there's a little bit of information here on the screen, but I'll be more than happy to help you get an estimate if you're trying to figure out where you stand. Next slide. Oh, costly students, we're right there. So costly students is those students that you have that in comparison to another student, it's very expensive. So I want to talk specifically about the things that are probably happening within your agency. One, what we would consider a costly student is someone that you're paying, over the average amount, and they leave the jurisdiction. So it moves out the jurisdiction, parents move, what have you, but they're no longer there. So that amount, so that student was costing you quite a bit of money, and then they're gone. That amount is now able to be used. We have a few more points to this that we want to make. Next slide, Joanne. A student who has reached the age where they no longer are in your school division. So they've aged out, as we would like to say. That would be another reason why you would be able to use this exception. You no longer have that expense. That student left. And then you have some students who needed a program for a certain period of time, but they no longer need that program. That cost can also be used. And then finally, I think we talk about what an exceptionally costly program means. It's 2 to 3 times more than the average. So when we start talking about a program, then we want to make sure you understand, in comparison, it's 2 to 3 times the average cost for providing the related services in a school division. So here's just, again, I like to make sure we have something here for people who are more visual. You have a student in the 2019-2020, because that's the comparison year we're using. they were $50,000 was being paid to an interpreter. Now, in 2020, 2021, the student has left or moved across the country, I think it looks like we said, and they're no longer there. $50,000 is the allowable exception that you can use because the student has now left. The expense is not being incurred any longer. Next slide. Okay, decrease in costly expense. So this is the termination of expenditures for long-term purchases. All right, so that's equipment or construction in most cases. So let's take a look at an example of how that might look for you. So construction costs related to special education would generally be prorated. I want to talk about that because there's a percentage that's probably also the school is picking, the entire school division. Part of it is special education, smaller part of it is general education. We would expect there to be a percentage of that, not the entire amount if it's not specific to an individual student. So there's some exceptions that we would consider case by case. So let's take a look at an example. The school division expends funds for a 2-year construction project. So take a look at the chart. You see that there's $70,000 in year 1, year 2 is $100,000. The LEA can reduce its level of effort in year 3 by the $100,000. Now, what Tracy Coleman wanted me just to remind you is that this is it this slide? Oh, I might be a little bit ahead of myself. Let me go to the next slide so I can remind you what she wanted me to tell you. But it had to do with this slide. I'm sorry, I was getting ahead of myself. So if there's no other, go back once, Tracy, Joanne, I want to make sure I didn't go too fast. So again, if you have any questions about construction, this can be a little bit more confusing. I want to make sure you guys reach out and make sure we do that correctly, but the system will walk you through the steps. As I was saying though, you're doing this ahead of time, so you don't have the system that you're working with, you're just trying to figure out if you're going to meet. I want to make sure you understand that construction is an option or equipment. The last one that we're going to go over, and we're doing good on time, so we want to leave some time for questions or dialogue, is adjustment for local fiscal effort. For me, this is probably the more complicated adjustment for me, because I have to say I haven't seen anyone use it. Yay, that's a good thing. But this is, and I'm going to read it just to make sure we're clear. For any fiscal year in which an allocation is received by an LEA, exceeds the amount that the LEA received for the previous year. So you're getting more money. The LEA may reduce the level of expenditure otherwise required by not more than 50% of the amount of the excess. So we're talking year over year, the division has received more money, and then you're able to take a 50% reduction. A little more complicated. So let's talk about it. First of all, I want to say this. Every division will not be able to use this, even if it happened that they receive more money, they will not be able to use it. An LEA may not take this reduction, one, if they're unable to establish or maintain programs of faith, or if the SEA has taken action against them. So if you're under some type of action with the state, the DOE, no, you're not going to be able to use this. We also would be prohibited from using this if your local determination is needs assistance, needs intervention, or needs substantial intervention. Again, you will not be allowed to use this adjustment. And then the third one, of course, if you're required to budget 15% for CCEIS, you will not be able to use this adjustment. So next slide. So here we go again, talking a little bit more about this adjustment. In this particular instance, we're just reviewing the fact that the LA may reduce the level of effort or state and local expenditure otherwise required to meet MOE by up to 50% of the amount of the excess. But the most important part that a lot of divisions understand this but haven't used it is that as long as the LEA uses the freed up funds, see, this is a little bit of the requirement for activities that could be supported under ESSA, the LEA will need to provide evidence and demonstrate how these funds were spent. So you would have to use those remaining funds, the freed up funds, in order to use this exception for ESSA, and then you need to keep the documentation that is required. So back to this point again, we're bringing up the CARES Act again, because this is where people are going to think that, hey, I did receive additional funds. No, you did not receive additional funds, because the CARES Act funds do not represent an increase in LEA's IDA allocation. So no, you cannot use this exception because you received the CARES Act fund, at least not for that. Hopefully that's clear. Now, overall, what we wanted to make sure you walked away with is resources. Understanding that there's 4 exceptions that you can use. But the steps that you need to make sure is that you guys have done the work, that you've got your expenditures together, you're categorizing them by local and state. At that point in time, if you find that you did not meet, you want to then go and start looking at those allowable exceptions if needed. If you look at the allowable exceptions, you still cannot meet MOE. Stop, call Shalonda, send me an email. Please do not wait to January. We want to get ahead of it now. If you think after doing your preliminary work, you find that you still have not met MOE, you want to make sure you reach out now. Let's see here. I have a couple more. So let's stop at this point and take another poll. We took the temperature of the room when we started to see where you stood. Now, after kind of going through that, and I know it was quick, and we're going to go through it again in December, I want to get a feel for what do you think? Where after that information, and I know for some of you it's still too overwhelming, but I want to get a temperature gauge. Are we ready, Joanne? You tried to give this one a little earlier. Are we ready to take the poll again? There it is.
I'm working on it. Yeah, there. Here we go.
It's there. We got it.
Good, good. Again, short questions, 1 question, short answers.
And be honest, because I made the questions with Joanne. So you won't hurt my feelings if you choose number 4.
Well, it's just so important that everybody have the opportunity to be able to review this. And, part of a big prompt in doing this early is to get folks working on it to make sure that they're not surprised by what they find if they wait till later. So we can have a way to try to work this out with you and give you assistance. Okay, I would say we have about 60% of our participants who have completed it, and that's about what we have been doing all day. So we've got 62 now. I'm going to end the poll in about a few seconds.
Okay.
Okay. We're right at 64 of 102 participants have answered. Kind of gives us an idea of what our goal was. I've stopped the poll and I'm going to share it. So you will see that has confirmed we need to start reviewing the information data now. That's exactly what we were hoping for, is to get this on your radar screen, because we also know that with our monitoring, our fiscal monitoring, that having this information is so important when we go through. And then we're sure that much of this funds and regulations will be monitored by USEG, especially with all the money we've gotten from CARES and ARP funding. So thank you for giving us that information, and thank you for heeding our intent is to get you prompted to start this process. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, Shalonda. And
Absolutely,
move us
absolutely. Okay,
move
so
forward.
let's go ahead and move to the next slide. I thank you so much for your honesty. Please go ahead and I know find time to go ahead and start getting going on MOE if you can. What you can expect coming soon is, of course, the MOE superintendent's memo stating that the MOE submission date will be opening, and that you should see that in November. You're going to see an assistant superintendent's memo come to you, of course, email come to you explaining when we're going to have our sessions and the links, just as you received for this meeting. And then, of course, the due date for MOE submission is January, which I know all of you are going to get in early because you were here early trying to get a good basis for what you need to do next. So here's a couple updates. For those in the room today, the American Rescue Plan, ARP, if you have not submitted your budget transfer for, or your what we're using now as your application for ARP, so to speak. If you haven't submitted it, please do so. There's only a few stragglers, but we need you to submit that now. Hopefully you understand that you are not to spend any money until you've had approval or pre-approval. If things have been spent or bought before, or money have been spent and things have been bought prior to the approval, that will cause you to be out of compliance, and those particular reimbursements will be denied. So please don't catch yourself in that situation. Proportionate set aside. The window will open on Friday, October 22nd, and it will close on November 30th. Please be prepared to take care of that submission as soon as it launches. And things are going to be different. So please take a look at the guidance document. The 2019 IDA Part B award is closed. So you need to submit your expenditures. You need to submit for reimbursement by October 3rd, 2021, because that award is now closed. We are asking you to spend down 2020 IDA Part B funds. Those expenditures and need to be encumbered and received by September 30th, 2020. Reimbursement requests need to be submitted by October 20, 2022. I'm sorry, both of those are say 2022. I think I said 2020. My apologies. I believe I saw something in the chat that my fiscal monitoring person wanted me to mention. Colleague, he wanted me to mention that this is a good time with your MOE that you document your process. Make sure you've retained all of the appropriate documentation for those expenditures, and make so that in case or if you are monitored or reviewed, you have those items together. But most importantly, I want to stress, document your MOE process so that you know how you do it from year to year, and it's not new if someone has to step into your shoes. Do we have another slide?
Okay, we do have the slide, and everyone please contact Shalonda if you have any questions, and especially if you find yourself not thinking you're going to make it, the MOE, just please contact her at this email address. And at this time, we have one more slide. This is a thank you slide. I'm going to put it up, but please stay on. I'm going to close the recording so that we can go over the questions in the chat box.
Absolutely. So thanks to everyone on my team, and of course our director, Tracy Coleman, who is on